The following broadcast was produced by the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco as part of our Lighthouse Learning Library.
Hey everybody, my name is Jim Barbour and I work for Yahoo, and in case no one told you, that's where you are now. You are in one of our conference rooms in Building E, which is across the street from the main campus. I work here as what's called a service engineer. I do a lot of computer programming, a lot of planning, a lot of directing of other people. I do a lot of that kind of work. So I spend some time at the keyboard and some time in meetings and sometimes sort of planning what other people are going to do. And let's see, I live in Mountain View, and I usually get here by taking public transit of one kind or another. And I guess I'll probably wait to say much more until you ask questions.
My name is Brent Barrow, and I work as a network engineer for a small company called ViaNet out of Palo Alto. I work and live in Santa Cruz, so the network is the computer, as Son used to say, and so I can do most of my work remotely. I have an office in downtown Santa Cruz that I get to either by taking public transportation or walking, but occasionally, usually once a month, but sometimes more, often I commute to Palo Alto to meet at the main headquarters with my colleagues, and I do that taking public transit, so I can get from Santa Cruz to Palo Alto on public transit in the mornings. Spend a lot of time on the phone and behind a keyboard, and I do various tasks: programming, sales, troubleshooting, support, you name it. And I too will wait for the questions.
Right. Well, can you walk us through a day at your job and some of your main functions and ways you add value to your organization?
Ways I add value to my organization. So what often happens for me is I wake up and I get up and shower and so on, and then I will start my day even before I get to work checking on emails to see if anything bad has happened during the night. The group I work for is called the Production Engineering Group, and so we worry about user-facing stuff. We worry about making sure that the search engine and that mail and other things, all the other things that are part of Yahoo that you guys would go and visit are always up and running. So I get up in the morning, I check and see how things are going, and then I sort of make a plan for the day. And then I usually eat breakfast and hop a bus and a light rail to the office. And then it really depends. Some days are very meeting focused, where I need to sit down with other engineers or managers or customers and plan out something, how we're going to roll out a particular product, what we're going to do about the fact that something is running slowly, how are we going to architect some new feature that we want to put in, just all kinds of stuff like that. So sometimes I'll be in meetings, other times I'll be writing up proposals and publishing them to people. This is how I want to do this is what I think we should do. These are best practices we want to abide by, those kinds of influencing documents. And often I spend time coding. So I'll be at a keyboard and I'll be writing programs in Perl or C or other languages actually it's a lie, I've written C code. Perl and Python and Shell and other languages around here to either gather data or test things or sort of validate assumptions I've made, or other kinds of things like that. I do not do any programming for particular products, so there's none of my code sitting inside the search engine or anything like that. The ways in which I add value to my organization are by knowing a lot about what's going on, understanding a lot about how the various pieces of the company work, being able to answer questions quickly about what will happen if we do this, or what will happen if we don't do this, those kinds of questions. And being able to say I don't know when I truly don't know. Right. Those are a lot of the ways in which I add value to my organization.
My typical day is not dissimilar. I typically get up and usually do a quick check of email to see how things have gone over the night. We are a smaller company, and so I tend to have more hats. So if there's a tech support issue that needs working on, I will usually make a phone call or take a phone call for a customer and talk to the customer and resolve their issue. Or if there's an ongoing, or there's always background ongoing projects, so if there's no active, support issues that need to be worked on, there are programming projects to be worked on. I typically, go downtown, and that's also an office. So it's really, my day is often just spent with me because I work alone most of the time. And but I do spend, as I say, a lot of time on the phone or composing or reading emails or writing code or writing proposals as well. I add value to the company because I do a lot of the system architecture of how our company operates. So I design the servers that we're going to use and the infrastructure and how that infrastructure is going to look. Do a lot of work on a lot of database work. I'm really all over the map, and every day is really quite different, which is exciting because it doesn't get boring.
I get to spend enough time in front of a computer that I get to feel like I'm, accomplishing things by writing programs and playing with things and finding out how things work. And yet I also get to boss other people around. I get to kind of figure out how things should be done and lay them out and sort of tell other people how to do them. So I sort of have a nice mix of being able to be an individual contributor and sort of being able to be an influencer. I don't actually have any direct reports. I don't manage anybody, but I do quite a bit of team leading and influencing. So, I really like knowing how to do the work I do. I like getting it done. I like sort of knowing that I built something and it's useful.
I think I like the variety, even though I spend a lot of time just, at the computer, and that part is, it would be nice to sometimes get out more, but I like the variety. One day I can be working on a database problem. The next day I might be working with a customer, which is always really, rewarding. Talking to them, getting their stories, and the next day I might be doing a voice over IP project. So really the breadth, and also I also am an influencer because I get to sort of make decisions, or at least make influence about how we do things or what we deploy and how we deploy it, and do a lot of design work, and that's really interesting.
Was there a specific event or series of events that led you to choose this career field?
You want to go first?
Sure. Well, I sort of got into computers when I was in junior high school. I had a teacher who said, you really maybe would be really good if you did computers. And so I guess you could say I was a little bit tracked. But I found it interesting, and I found it fascinating that I could type code and make the machine do something, and I found that pretty rewarding. I've always been sort of mechanically inclined,
This is Alan right now.
I would.
Hey, let me just get out of
I'd be,
there.
when I go to a dance or I talk to the DJ, and I was always more interested in how the machinery worked than actually doing the DJ work itself. And when I was in high school, we had a low-power radio station, and I worked on that, and I was always more interested in the engineering work than the DJ work there. So I kind of have always had this mechanical, tinkering kind of mentality, and computing was a good way to sort of satisfy that need without necessarily having to be a dock worker or a plumber or a carpenter. Although I find those interesting, I'm not sure that they were good trades for me at the time.
Yeah, I too discovered computers, and for me it was in high school, and I got an Apple II and started to play with it, and then my high school offered a Fortran programming class, and so I took that, and then had the opportunity to do some CETA funded, which is basically government funded jobs for blind kids when I was in high school, and I did some work for a university. Really, what started me down this path was sort of learning how cool it was to be able to tell a computer to do something and have it do it, right? Some power and some, wow, look, I can make something happen. At some point, though, I had to sort of decide I was going to make this a career, which meant more than just sort of programming the computer. I had to sort of, deal with customers and deal with colleagues and, really build a career around it, which didn't happen for me until later. In some ways, I felt trapped, but in other ways, computer IT really looked like a field that was going to grow, and so I sort of decided to take the risk and sort of step on it, and I think it worked out pretty well. My first job, so what had happened with me is I had been in college for a long time. I literally spent 10 years trying to get my undergrad. During that time, I would be a student half-time, and I would be doing college employment half-time, doing various computer projects for various people, and passing many of my courses, failing a couple, and sort of moving from semester to semester, being almost finished. When a friend of mine called me in 1991, which is, again, I was almost 10 years as an undergrad at that point, and said, would you like a job? And I said, well, maybe, tell me about it. So we talked, and I went down and interviewed, and they offered me a job, and the money was good. I was going from having no money to making $35,000 a year. I was like, hey, I like that. So I took the job. I went in on my first day, kind of started getting used to the computer systems, talking with people, and I sat there and I all of a sudden had this feeling of, is this really it? I thought about the fact that I would probably never again be walking around campus in the middle of the day, right? I would be here, I'd be in this office all day long, every day. And I thought about how this was a huge change in my life, and I almost got up and walked out. I was like, I don't know that I can do this. I don't know that I want to do it. I was scared to death. But I stayed, and I decided I would just sort of take it day by day, and I pretty quickly, learned that I had a lot to offer, and that they were paying me to do something I enjoyed doing anyway. And I didn't mind so much being in the building all the time. But it was, in fact, a real shock to get my first full-time job and sort of realizing that, this is a huge change from the sort of nomadic campus life I had been living up until that point.
I was, so it's hard to know where I got my first job. I was in high school, and my local city had a jobs training program, and it was for general, it was for everybody, and but I had gotten wind of it, and I filled out the application, and I applied, and they called me and they said, this is the first year we've done this program, and we don't know, we didn't get a huge number of applicants, and we've never worked with a blind person, but we think we have a placement for you, and if you're interested, you could do it. And I said, well, that'd be great, right? I mean, I got the job, I was great, and I want to tell you a little bit about the first two jobs because I think they illustrate two things. So that job, I want to say that it's key, and it was absolutely critical that I had gotten good mobility training, because my first job, this job with the jobs training program, I lived in a city in a suburb of Southern California of Los Angeles, and I had to take the bus every day to go to another suburb, and it was about, I don't know, a 30-minute bus ride, so it was an hour trip one way, each way. And I got there, and there was another guy there, and he was a blind guy, and he was older than I am today at the time, and his job consisted of sitting at a desk, answering the phone, and talking to people, and he was supposed to give out numbers. It was a referral service. It was a volunteer organization, and what they did was that if you needed like public assistance or aid to families with dependent children or things like that, if you needed that, then you could call this organization, and they would give you all the numbers and contact information and help you figure out what you needed to do to get your application or your claim or whatever what you was that you were doing, get that started. So his job was to answer the phone and talk to people and give out that data, but he didn't read Braille. And so if he wanted to get a number for somebody, he had to, his boss would make these cassette tapes of everything, and he would have to reel through the tape and find the number and then talk it, give it to the customer. Or more likely what he did was he just took their name and phone number, recorded that into another tape recorder, and then his boss would listen to those tapes and transcribe the information, look it up, and then call the customer back and say, here's the data that you need. Extremely inefficient. So what I did was I took all the index cards that they had in the office and I brailled them so I could look up the data directly. And then I took all the cassette tapes that he made and I typed them, because I could type. I learned to type, another important skill. And I gave those to the boss. So I became the translator between this guy, and then I started taking calls, and I could look things up directly. So it was much more efficient. And then I started programming the boss's computer to do all his mail merge stuff. Then when I went to the university, I started working as a caretaker for, we had terminal labs, and the terminal labs all had these green chain printers. I don't know if some of you remember them, but they were these green paper with green lines and chain printers, and they always needed maintenance. And so it was I volunteered, and I took care of the, putting the ribbons in and making sure they were stocked with paper. And I sort of got I moved out of that when I was working on the computer system, and I had to do quite a bit of work to make it accessible for myself. And in the process of doing that, I crashed their system. And I said, well, I did this, and I know how to fix it. Here's the bug. And they said, well, if you can fix it, you can do that. And the other thing that I did was I volunteered to make we had a centralized printing service, and they had a Braille printer. They had an old TSI VersaPoint or whatever, and you couldn't use it because it was like locked in a room somewhere. And I said, well, why don't we hook it up to this campus network, and you can print from any central computer a Braille document, and then go pick it up at the printing service, which was open 24/7. And they said, that's a wonderful idea. And so I wrote all the codes to hook it up to that, and they had it parked there for a long time. And then when I graduated, they said, well, we want you to do this project. We have this other project that we'd like you to work on, and could you do that? And so they hired me on a temporary basis, and then I became quite valuable to them, so they then took me on as a permanent employee. So those are sort of how I got my first 2 jobs. Short, long story.
So I told you a little bit about the first job I had, which was working for a federal government contractor. And I had that job for 4 or 5 years, and it was a great way for me to sort of learn how to be in an office, how to work with other people, how to sort of take direction, how to give direction. It was basically I took my computer skills and my mobility skills and my people skills, which actually weren't that great then, but I took those and sort of began to build a career for myself. So after about 4 years at this job, I started looking around, and I was living in Colorado at the time, and I found this job opportunity out in San Diego, and I called them up and applied and got through the screening process and flew out there for an interview. Now you have to understand, right? I'm in Colorado. I have pretty good mobility skills. I can get around. And in fact, I'd done some flying before this, but I was basically flying from Colorado to San Diego, had to get myself from the airport to the hotel I was staying at, from the hotel I was staying at to the company I was interviewing at and back. Plus, I needed to take a look around and see if I thought I would be able to live there and commute. And I basically had to do a bunch of research. So I did all that, passed the interview, got a job offer, considered it for a while, decided to take it. So I basically moved to San Diego where I didn't know anyone, didn't have any family or friends or anything, and started this new job. So that was my second job. That was a very interesting job and a very difficult one. I basically took over doing the technical leadership for some Unix tools, and I had to learn a lot about their environment, and I had to, I basically had to become valuable to them, right? I walked in the door with raw skills, and we had to take those skills and sort of make me valuable. And plus I was living in San Diego, which doesn't have very good public transit. I mean, there are buses there, but getting to where I worked, there were like 3 buses a day, and I had to walk quite a bit, and there were times when I missed the bus and had to arrange for a ride or get a cab. So it was a very challenging beginning, but I really thrived there. I learned a lot. I went, I started out as what's called an associate engineer, which is sort of an entry-level position, and I worked my way all the way up to what's called a staff engineer, which is sort of the top of the individual contributor rank tree for engineers. After that, you go back to school and you become an architect or something. So I really grew there. While I was there, I discovered Google, which at the time was brand new, and I tried to apply for a job there. Google was up here in the Bay Area, so I flew up here and I talked to them, and they didn't hire me. They decided I wasn't good enough to get hired. I sort of felt like it probably wasn't an issue of my blindness, but it was that I just didn't quite have the skills I needed. So I went back to Qualcomm where I was working and continued working, and about a year later, Google contacted me. They said, we see your resume, we see that you look interesting to us. They didn't remember they'd interviewed me a year ago. So they asked me if I wanted to come up and interview. And I said, well, sure, I'd love to come back up and interview. So I went back up, and Brian will remember this because I went up a few days early to see a friend of mine who was living in Palo Alto at the time, and then I went down to see Brian and helped him finish packing up his house because he was about to have some remodeling done. So it's like 1 o'clock in the morning before my job interview, and I'm like, I gotta quit, I gotta go to bed. So I got up the next morning and came over the hill and took the Caltrain to Mountain View and got myself to Google and did the interview. And I was really nervous about that interview because I had done one a year earlier, and Google interviews are notoriously difficult, and they are. They expect you to study, they expect you to really be able to show them something interesting when you walk in your interview. And I thought I could do that, but I was still very nervous about it. So I had the interview, and then actually I went and met Brian, and we were actually taking a trip to an NFB convention right after that. So we went to convention, and while we were there, I got the phone call offering me the job. And I was really, really excited. I was like, wow. I worked for them for like 4 or 5 years. And the thing about Google is they are a very demanding place to work. I would routinely work from 8 in the morning until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. I would work in the office, I'd work at home, and I would never feel like I was finished. There's always more, there's always something somebody wanted. So after about 3 or 4 years, I started looking around and I found Yahoo. And I came here and I interviewed and had a lot of confidence when I interviewed at Yahoo. And they offered me a job, and they offered me a considerable salary bump and some other things, and so I wound up coming here. So it's kind of interesting for me. The things that have gotten me where I am today are first of all, I'm very comfortable that my blindness is not the thing that's going to keep me from getting the interview. The interviewer may wind up deciding that they won't hire me because I'm a blind person. Hopefully I can talk them out of it, but the blindness is not going to keep me from getting to the company, getting to where I need to be, sitting down and talking to the people I need to talk to, being able to sort of persuade them that I know what I know. My blindness is not going to be the thing that gets in the way. In order for that to be the case, I need to be confident in my travel skills, confident in my presentation skills, confident that I can dress and act appropriately, confident that I will be someone that they look at and want to hire. The other thing is I need to have skills. For me, those are computer skills, and I've been sort of building them since I was in high school, and I feel like my computer skills are pretty good. More and more these days, it also means having some managerial skills, needing to be able to sort of build timelines and build projects and plan and think about how things are going to be done, document all that stuff, be able to sort of write presentations that other people, not only that they can read in the sense that they're in print, but can read in the sense that they're well organized, and that people will actually sit and take the time to read through them. So there's a whole lot of skills that I kind of feel like I need to have. My career development, I often think about what I want to do. Do I want to continue to be a computer IT engineer? Do I want to go sort of help build a startup somewhere, which is many more hours, but you get to sort of play a larger role? Do I want to do some kind of computer policy somewhere? Do I want to think about like internet security and other kinds of things like that? I don't know what my future is going to be, but I'm very lucky to have sort of built myself to a place where I have options, and I'm not afraid to sort of look around and sort of see what's available to me. I don't know if I answered your question, but there's a bunch of things I wanted to say.
That's very good.
When I interviewed at Yahoo, reached really high when I told them how much I wanted. It's like, I'm going to throw out a number and it's going to be really high, and they in fact accepted it. I think it's important. I think it's important to kind of begin to realize that you have value and that people want you. And the only way to realize it is to do work, whether it's volunteer work or paid work or work that isn't quite exactly what you want to be doing or whatever. That there's a lot of confidence building that is really good to do. And I also, for both Brian and I think that we really do have many moments of self-doubt. You want me to do what? I've never done this before. I'm not sure I can do it, but I have to. But the only way to learn is to start doing. And so there's a lot of self-doubt, but there's also a lot of self-confidence, and that's sort of what happens, I think, to make people sort of more employable, is that they have self-confidence and they sort of also that they are willing to sort of take on new challenges that they have no idea whether they're going to succeed at or not. When I worked at Qualcomm, so now there's Yahoo, and then there was Google, and then there was Qualcomm. They needed me to do some traveling. I needed to go to Boston to look at some machines. I needed to go to Texas to do some work for them. And there wasn't really any skepticism, but they just assumed I wouldn't do it. They just assumed they were going to have to find somebody else. They assumed that as a blind person I wouldn't be able to certainly rent a car and do the other kinds of things that they needed me to, that they would need for me to be able to do in order to do this work. And I sort of heard about it. I heard that this opportunity was coming up and that they were thinking about giving it to somebody else. And it didn't sound right? It sounded like something they really ought to be giving to me. And I went and talked to my boss, and my boss sort of didn't want to say anything, or maybe didn't know anything, I don't know for sure. But he was just like, well, it's their decision, pointing at somebody else. So I had to go track down people and talk to them, and nobody really wanted to have the conversation. It's a very uncomfortable conversation to have from either side. It's very uncomfortable to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to send you because, you're blind, right? Nobody really wants to say that. But on the other hand, I needed to kind of run this to ground, and so I sort of had a few conversations where basically I had to say, what is it that worries you about me doing this work, right? Do you think I can't do the work? Oh, no. Is it that you think? And I had to kind of get them to sort of go, well, yeah, it's your blindness, and then I could say, well, listen, I tell them the story about how I came to this company and how I had to fly out from Colorado. I just sort of start having conversations with them and getting them to kind of listen, and eventually I wound up doing the work. I've also had a couple of situations where I basically have had to say, listen, I have tried to convince you of this. You don't seem to be listening. I need you to understand that that my blindness isn't going to keep me from doing the work, but if you sort of prevent me from getting ahead because of my blindness, that's not going to be, I've never actually said the word lawsuit, but I've had to say things like, it's going to be kind of bad for the company, right? Or it's going to cause problems. And it's a very hard conversation for me to have because you never want to make people feel like you're threatening them, because then they don't ever want to be around you. But you need to sort of figure out a way to kind of make them understand that there's an upside to you doing the work and there's a downside to them not letting you do the work if it's around blindness. It's a very, very difficult conversation to have. I've never found it to get easier. But I tend to find, though, that people don't come up to me and go, I have this great work I'd like to give you, but because you're blind, I don't think I'm going to give it to you. That's generally not the way it works. Generally, you have to kind of keep your ears open, and when something sounds suspicious, you have to go kind of run it down.
My experience sort of reflects, is sort of similar to Jim's. I can remember, I think that there was some, I can remember 2 instances, I think, where there was some skepticism, and some of the skepticism, I think it's important to say, Jim alluded to this a few minutes ago when he talked about, moments of self-doubt. I was tasked when I worked at the university with a project where I was to be the chief architect and designer of an entirely new infrastructure that we were building. And we had a model at another university to work from, and we had been working from that model for a long time. So I did have a roadmap on which to go, but it was my responsibility to build this infrastructure, to integrate it into our environment, and to make it work. And I'll say as a side note that I did that in 1997, and they're still using it today. So at the time, one of the things that was required of me was to go to a week-long training for this product that we were buying, and I had to go down to LA and rent a hotel for a week and go to this class and figure out how to make all the material that was going to be provided in the class accessible to myself, and so I could be a full participant. And I was asked if it was sort of assumed that if I was going to be the lead on this project, I had to go get the training. And we had done two of these. Once there was some skepticism, and I was asked to go do some investigation on a project and take the lead on it. And a colleague and I went, and we traveled together, and we traveled to Boston and stayed there for a week and did a bunch of research. But this particular one, I was supposed to be on my own. I was the one getting the training. They didn't want to pay for 2 people. So I was asked if I was willing to do it, and I said yes, I was willing to do it, but I was absolutely scared, spitless. Because while I knew I could rent a room and whatnot, I was basically going to be going down to a city where I hadn't, I didn't really know. I had family there, I had grown up there, but everyone had moved away, and I really didn't have any resources that I knew about, at my disposal. It helped that I had previously traveled through Europe on my own without any resources, so I wasn't really worried that I wasn't going to be able to find the hotel or anything. As Jim said, my blindness wasn't going to be the thing that kept me from getting there, but it was just sort of all the combination: getting to class, getting the materials, being able to, work with the materials. Would the instructor be accommodating? Would he be willing to explain things or answer questions that he might not otherwise have to answer? All these questions that kind of went through my head as I'm, packing my bag and going to the airport. And so I think that there was some skepticism from my colleagues, but mostly they were like, well, you say you can do it. Here you go. Here's the keys. Here's your ticket. Here's your money. Go. And then I'm like, okay, well, I have to do it. And I have to say that it was a very successful experience. The instructor was very accommodating. He was able to get me a bunch of the material in electronic form, and when that material that I wasn't able to do, he pretty much went over it in class, and so I was able to write to Braille in class while the class was happening. So on the whole, it was a very positive experience, and that, I think, is really important. I think this is true for Jim as well, but it's certainly been true for me that the most rewarding experiences in my career have been the most challenging and the most scary from the outset. And that's okay. It's okay to be scared. It's just not okay to stop.
It's okay to be scared, but do it anyway, right? You'll regret much more the times when you didn't than the times when you did. You need to be independent. You need to be able to travel independently. So I would say you must be able to present yourself professionally. So if that means that, if you're confident in your ability to dress nicely, then great. If not, then, get some coaching. You absolutely need to be able to get to the place where you're going to interview. If you feel comfortable taking public transit, great. If not, make sure you've got a cab or a car or some way to get there and some way to get back. You really don't want to be asking these guys to help you, find a cab or find a bus stop or whatever, right? They're there to interview you. So you want to walk in, do the interview, and leave. And you absolutely need to know the skills or the whatever that you're interviewing about. I mean, Brian and I are both really good at what we do, and I would say before any interview, Brian and I both will sit down, pick up some literature and read it, make sure that we are sharp, that we are totally boned up on the skills that we're going to be interviewing for. But you need to be able to show up, look professional, look like you can get there and get back on your own, and answer the questions that they ask you. Really, that's what it comes down to for, I think, almost any interview.
Yeah, I would pretty much agree with what Jim said. If you need to, it's critical, and I think I said this earlier, it's critical that you be able to travel independently. I cannot stress to you how important that is. And traveling independently means, in my mind, that you are able to go out and walk around on the street. You feel confident to cross streets. You may not know where you are. You may not know exactly where you're going, but you know enough that you can figure out how you're going to get there, and how you're going to, you don't feel like you're just totally, swimming and you don't really know how to get there. But you can go to a place and you can be at a given location at a given time. Another critical skill, I think, is that if you are not print capable, that is to say that you cannot read or write print efficiently, and Jim may disagree with me on this a little bit, but if you cannot read or write print in an efficient manner, it really, really, really is important, and I have found it invaluable to learn or sharpen your Braille skill. Braille is absolutely critical. I don't necessarily use it every day in my job, but when I use it, it's there for me, and I actually do use it many days, not a lot, just a little for quick notes or whatever. But if I need it, it's there. If I'm in a lecture and I need to take notes, I can absolutely sit with a slate and stylus and do that. And by the way, that's not a skill that I got in high school. I was discouraged actively by my Braille instructors and my itinerant resource teachers from learning and perfecting my slate and stylus skill. It wasn't until I went to college and I discovered that, I really didn't want to carry a Perkins around everywhere. And I didn't want to carry a tape recorder because I didn't really want to listen to the tape after the class. I'd already heard the lecture. So having the slate and stylus and being able to Braille is absolutely invaluable.
I don't disagree with Brian at all about Braille. I don't actually have Braille skills, and I miss them. I miss them a lot. I wind up needing to memorize notes for a speech I'm going to give, which means my speeches are usually short. I wind up needing to record meetings where I absolutely have to be able to record minutes to email out to other people. And then yes, I have to waste an hour going back and listening to the meeting again. There's absolutely no good substitute for good Braille skills. They aren't essential, but they will help you an awful lot.
You don't want to come off as being weird when you're interacting with people. You want to be comfortable. You want to be able to talk with them. You want people to feel comfortable around you. That one is a little bit more amorphous. I'm not quite sure how to say. Everyone's a little bit different. But having good social skills is essential, I think, to interacting and working with colleagues in a job setting. It's not about, it is about the skills that you have as an employee, your computer skills, your programming skills. We talk about, you see stories in the media about the savant blind guy or the savant deaf guy who, or the savant programmer who can make any computer sing and dance whatever he wants. What they don't talk about in the media is that most of the time, at least in my jobs, especially jobs where I've been in offices and I've been working with people on a daily basis, it's about interaction and the social interaction between my colleagues and myself. And if I didn't have good social skills, or people didn't feel comfortable around me, it would be a lot harder to do that job, and it'd be a lot harder to win their confidence that I am capable of doing what I say I'm capable of doing.
I will actually say that I have in the past let people go, contractors in particular, let them go for not having good social skills. So they weren't actually even blind people. But we hired people in this particular situation because we needed them to go sit with teams of engineers, build relationships, learn things, and then come back and report back to us. And when this guy showed up at work, I was pretty convinced he wasn't going to be able to do that. And after 2 or 3 days, I just decided I needed to let him go. So this is not some in theory kind of a thing. Social skills are going to be a really important part of any job. There's actually one other thing I wanted to mention briefly, which is that one of the things you will probably need to do in your interview is to talk about your blindness. Often, the question never comes up, and sometimes there's this interesting thing that you have to figure out about who it is that you want to talk about this with, because you don't want to have a 10-minute conversation with each person that you interview. But if you get the opportunity to talk to the person who's going to manage you, or if you get the opportunity to talk to somebody who you think it's appropriate, they will often not ask you about your blindness, but they will often have questions about your blindness. How is he going to be able to get here? How is he going to be able to move from meeting to meeting? How is he going to be able to sort of meet with customers? Whatever the questions are. And so you will at some point need to say something along the lines of, so do you have any questions for me about my blindness? I know it's sort of tricky territory. I know you might be a little bit afraid to ask, but I want to give you this opportunity to ask me any questions you might have about my blindness. Generally, that helps a lot, because what will happen after you leave is there will be a conversation among these people where they try to decide whether to hire you or not. And more times than not, one of the things that will come up is, well, what about his blindness? I mean, it's okay to hire blind people, certainly, but for this job, will his blindness be an issue? And you won't have had any opportunity to weigh in unless you give yourself the opportunity. So when you interview, I highly encourage people to give at least one interviewer the opportunity to ask questions about your blindness.
I'll go even further and I'll say, I remember that I read Rami Ravi put out a book from National Braille Press about, 25 years ago, I guess. I think it was called Take Charge. And it was about, interviewing and job seeking as a blind person. And although a lot of the stuff is a little bit dated in it, it is absolutely true, the things that he said in there. And one of the things that I think it's in there, it says, if you don't have that conversation with a potential employer, you don't have the job. So you have to have that conversation, as uncomfortable as it may be. You absolutely have to have that conversation. And that's true even for, I remember I applied to live in a house once as a college student, and we had that conversation. We didn't have that conversation, and we had it later because they called me back and they said, we'd like to room with you. We really like you, but we don't think we can live with a blind person. And so we had that conversation, and they lived with me, and it worked, and it was okay.
And I think Brian would agree that he was lucky to get the second chance.
I was.
I mean, often they won't even bother. It's like, we'll go with this person over here instead.
So every job I've ever gotten, I've gotten through connections, through friends, nepotism, if you will. But I don't believe that it was, bad. But I've always gotten it through connections. So like when I worked at the university, I became, I got noticed by one of the networking programmers, and then the network engineer, and then one of the programmers, and they started giving me volunteer work, and then they saw that I had good stuff, and then they hired, asked me to apply for it, and I applied for another job. Then there was the headhunter. I don't know how my name got submitted to him, but somehow it did, and so that one was sort of special. And then my current job I got because an old college friend called me up and he said, I really want you to come work for me. I need this and this and this. Would you be willing to do it? And I said, sure. The company I was working for was, they were starting to implode, and it's better to leap off a sinking ship than to swim off of it. So I did that, and I've had my current job for, it's been through there was an acquisition and I was acquired, but I'm actually the exception in this industry in that I've had my current job for over 11 years now. So, I have I haven't had to do a lot of job hunting, and that's been nice, but it's probably not been the best thing for me.
So I will say that for me, the job hunting experience changes a lot once you have some history and experience behind you. I routinely these days get what I've started calling invitations to interview. They're emails from headhunters that say, I found your resume on LinkedIn, it looks interesting, we'd like to invite you in for an interview. And I ignore most of them, I act on a couple of them. And that was one of the ways in which I got the position I currently have at Yahoo. When you are starting out and what you have is some education and a lot of willingness to work, I think you have to work harder. I think that social networking is really important to you. I think making sure that you have a presence on LinkedIn, that presence does a very good job of selling you, that you indicate what your skills are, what you're willing to do, what your background is, and so on and so on, is a good first start. I think being able to search around online, and I don't mean going to like Monster and places like that where they broker jobs and candidates. I mean going and looking at companies' websites and doing a bunch of reading and sort of figuring out what kind of work you want to do and what would be a good place to do it, and do they have any openings, and how much do they pay, and what other companies are like this, and sort of doing the research needed to kind of discover openings and then sort of contacting people. I think even showing that you're willing to do that kind of work to get the job will sort of do a lot to sort of prove your commitment and your willingness to sort of start out. And when you're not, and when you're young, when you're starting out, you kind of have to do that. The way in which you get hired when what you have is ability to learn and some education is that you show you're willing to work hard. And then they hire you and you work hard and you build your skills and you do good work, and people start to point at you and say, when you want something done right, give it to him. I frankly have forgotten what the question was.
I have a friend, I think that there's no substitute for just, pounding your shoe leather, just pounding the pavement, applying for opportunities. If things look interesting, apply. Even if you don't necessarily think you want to do that job forever, if you are hungry and you are interested and you are willing to contribute good stuff, you will get a reputation. I have a friend, she had a good job, and she got laid off, and then she spent the next 18 months applying for job after job, and I can tell you that she went through a lot of periods of depression. But in the end, she got a job recently, and it's a very good job, and she got it as a result. She didn't even apply for it directly. Her resume got passed around from person to person and then she got one of these interview invitations, and she took it, and they hired her on the spot. So you just never know where people are going to get your resume, but they aren't going to get it if you don't get it out there. So get it out there.
Yeah. Could you touch base on how you were able to format and make sure your resume was formatted properly before submitting it to the application process?
I stole someone else's and modified it. I mean, seriously, I stole somebody else's resume that I liked, and I took out their name and their background, and I put in my name and my background, but I kept the formatting pretty much the same. Whatever you do it, and then get 2 or 3 other people to look at it. You can get people to proof it for content. I mean, God forbid that, misspellings and grammatical mistakes and stuff like that you should be able to find, but you should make sure that there aren't any. And then get people to look at it for friendliness. Is it easy to read? Is it formatted well? Is it the kind of thing that people will pick up and spend a minute reading? But seriously, that's what I did. I picked somebody else's resume.
I did that too.
Very cool.
I've been around a long time. Not much catches me off. I'm trying to remember what kinds of things I've had to deal with in interviews around that.
I know what, I went to a job interview once and I didn't get the job, and I knew that I didn't get the job, and I absolutely knew my stuff, but I knew I didn't get the job at the end of the interview when the guy asked me if I could find the stairs.
I know that I have done things that have kind of impressed people. I have, for example, so let me tell you a little bit about how my job often goes when I'm on the computer. With Linux, you spend a lot of time typing and looking at output. It isn't so much about moving a mouse or graphics or that kind of stuff. And so and this is true for everybody, not just for blind people. It's sort of less true today, but for a long time. And so blind people, or so anybody who is in this business would run commands like the output, edit files, run commands like the output, blah, blah, blah. And so often what would happen is that you'd be on one end of the phone talking to somebody on the other end of the phone, and you would be trying to get them to do the running of the commands and then telling you what the output is, basically, because they're the company that you're trying to support and they won't let you on their machines or whatever happens. And so I would routinely, I was very good at that, right? Because I could listen to computers all day. So I would say, well, type this command and tell me what you get back. And so I'm telling you all that because when I was in an interview one time, somebody said, how would you, what commands would you run to get the following information? And I sort of rattled them off. And he's like, don't you want to write them on the board? And I'm like, nope. I mean, you can write them down if you want. So I don't think I get a lot of questions. I seriously, I don't think that it comes up very often. I think most people are not comfortable asking you the uncomfortable questions about your blindness. They just want to skip it all together. I've been very lucky. I've worked for large companies, starting with the federal government contractor and then Qualcomm and then Google and then Yahoo. And so the way it works has always worked for me is that I get hired and then they ask you what you need. And as long as you're reasonable about your requests, I need a Windows machine that runs JAWS, I need, whatever it is that you need. It's never a problem. I know for a fact that this is not the case in smaller companies and in other situations, and I have never had to go through it myself. I've always been really lucky.
So I am of two minds on this. My experience has been different than Jim's. My experience is that I want to make myself as equal to my sighted colleagues as I can in terms of the cost I impose on the company versus the value I provide. And of course I want my value cost ratio to be very high on the value side and low on the cost side, if at least on the extra cost. They want them to pay me well, yes. And so I'm expensive in that way, but I want them to get value for their money. I don't want them to buy, spend all their money buying junk. So my experience is that I have always attempted and tried to bring my own access technology with me to my job because I know what I need, I have it. I've not worked for large companies where they were willing. I worked for companies where they were willing to buy stuff, but it was a little bit of an effort to get them to buy it. And when I worked at the university, it was like I could get the technology, I could get them to buy it, but the procurement process was extremely protracted. And all that time, if I didn't have my own technology, I couldn't get any work done. And so if I'm not getting work done and they're paying me, then I'm not of value. So, and then the other problem I've had is that if I switch jobs, then I can't, if my previous employer bought the technology, maybe they'll give it to me, but they don't have to, and if they don't, then I don't have the technology to take with me. So I've always been of the opinion that I would like, that I provide my own technology, and if there's a specific thing I need to get a specific task done for a particular job, then maybe I will ask the employer for something. And my current employer, for example, has never really bought me any technology except that when the KNFB reader phone came out, I had him buy. He was already paying for my cell phone, so I had him upgrade my cell phone and get the KNFB reader technology in the phone. And that's really the only purchase that I asked for. Although SEO did buy me a copy of JAWS, that actually turned out to be a problem because when they folded, I had a lot of trouble transferring the license away. They were willing to transfer the license, but I couldn't get a letter because there was no company that said that we were transferring the license to Brian. I finally had to just get Freedom Scientific to take their word for it, and they did it, but it was a little bit of finagling.
On the subject of phones, actually, Yahoo really likes their employees to use BlackBerries. And I was going to need to have a provided phone because I need to be able to check email and do other things when I was not at my desk. So I went and I asked about an iPhone, and initially they said, no, we don't buy iPhones for our employees. And I sort of said, well, listen, the deal with the BlackBerry is that you can buy the BlackBerry, and then you can buy the screen reader for the BlackBerry, which is actually more expensive than the BlackBerry itself. Or you can buy an iPhone, and I'm willing to let you guys decide. And they decided to buy the iPhone. So there are conversations like that you should have, and they should be reasonable conversations, and they should never ever be demanding conversations. They should be, in order for me to get my job done, I need this. In order to be able to do what my colleagues are doing, I'm going to need this or that. And there should always be that tone of conversation. And by the way, I think if I went to work for a small company or in situations different than my own, I would be like Brian. At this point, I would just own my own access technology and not expect the company to worry about it at all. I have a PC with JAWS on it, and I have an iPhone that talks, and I have a laptop that has JAWS. I think that's it.
I have a slate and stylus, and I do have a PC running JAWS, although I don't use it most of the time, and the JAWS is not the most current. And then I have a Unix machine running a screen reader, an open source screen reader with an open source synthesizer on it that I have heavily modified significantly to work for my needs. And that's pretty much what I use. And I put that on every computer I have, and I don't know how many computers I have, about 4 or 5 or so, something like that.
So I have enough vision that if I configure the machine correctly, I can get large enough letters that that's how I tend to do my Linux work, is by having terminals and other programs with large letters, and I tend to do things that way. I have a cane, and I read door signs and things that have Braille or sometimes tactile letters. That's about it for me.
Well, I was trained and know how to use an Opticon, but I wouldn't call that a sort of, it's been an invaluable skill, but it's not something I use on a daily basis. But Braille, I would agree, the cane, I'm pretty mechanically inclined, so I can pretty much kind of put my hands on a thing and fix it if it's broken, whether it's a computer that needs to be taken apart and reassembled because the hard drive needs replacement, or if it's because the monitor fell off Jim's desk and needs to be remounted.
That never happens. One thing we didn't talk about with your previous question, because we're sort of technology focused, is readers. Certainly it is possible to scan articles and so on these days with anything from the KNFB reader to Kurzweil technology to other things. But I often find it extraordinarily valuable to have a reader. Sometimes it's somebody I pay, sometimes it's a colleague in the office, whose job it is to scan a bunch of printed material and give me the flavor of what it is. This is a 10-page document. It's called blah. The table of contents is this. It tends to be laid out like this, and I can sort of direct them at the pieces of it I care about. There's a whole lot of technology that's come along that has tried to replace readers, and I want to be very clear that I think that there is a real place for readers in the working life of a blind person, and to dismiss that too quickly, I think, puts you at a real disadvantage.
I want to second that. I don't tend to use a lot of readers in my current job, but I have used them in the past to great advantage, and I would certainly use them again if the need arises. And there are times when I do rely on my colleagues to effectively do reading, and so I want to second and I want to strengthen what Jim said. Readers are absolutely a piece of access technology that is crucial and is vital to doing your work. And it can either be an informal thing, or you can formalize it and actually. We have a friend who he actually has, as part of his hiring contract, that he will have a reader some percentage, fairly high percentage of the time that he's on duty.
Although you have to be really
You have to be really good at your job to get that.
Yeah, but even if you have to find a volunteer or work out something with somebody else in the office with you, or pay them yourself, you won't have them all the time. But it's extremely valuable to know how to hire and manage and deal with readers. No, what I tend to do in situations like that is what I think the industry calls task sharing, where if there's a task that I am expected to do that my blindness makes really difficult. If there is something that my work wants me to do that is very difficult, I will just say, look, this is not a good use of my time. My blindness makes this a really not a good way for me to spend my time. Can I convince John over there to do that, and I will do something else for John? Sometimes it's that clean, and sometimes it's a little bit less clean than that. But for example, being able to look at graphs every day and sort of derive the information that I need to get from them just isn't a good use of my time. I'd much rather have someone else look at it and then give me a verbal 30-second description of what we're seeing that day. And there are other times when this comes up. Monitoring systems in particular these days tend to be very visual. They tend to be less about reading data and more about looking at colors and so on. And so getting someone else to do that kind of work is useful. This is easier to do once you've been in the world a couple of years and sort of have some understanding of how to sort of trade off one task for another. But it's something you should start thinking about getting good at, because there will just be tasks that don't make any sense for you to do as a blind person. Filling out time cards is another one, right? You could probably figure out a way to make it independent, but you do it every 2 weeks, and so sitting down with someone and just getting it done seems like the right answer to that.
I think there are levels of frustration, when there are times when I wish the access technology worked better. I don't think there's any time. I think Jim would be remiss to say that there aren't times when he wishes this access technology didn't work better.
Oh, well, if that's the question, absolutely.
Yeah.
But once I've sort of done the cursing, then it's okay. What do I do about the problem?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I want to say that that's kind of what I wanted to get at, which is that it's not that we aren't frustrated or wish that the technology didn't work better. We absolutely do, and we often have conversations between Jim and I about, God, wouldn't it be nice if this just did this, or if this piece of technology just did that? But having said that, the bottom line is we're there to get a job done, and I too, like Jim, will do task sharing, or I'll do task modification. For example, I'm probably not the guy to design your web page visually. I'm not gonna be the one to write the web page and make it look all pretty. However, I can do all the infrastructure work. I can write all the forms. I can write all I can give you a plain page that's usable, and then once having done that, you can make it pretty, or somebody else can make it pretty. So I can do that kind of teamwork with people, and that way do task sharing or task modification.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions I have. So.
Wow, that's 12:15.
Yeah. So.
So you want to do open Q&A?
Yeah. So just to make it easy, you guys throw up your hand, and I'll help everyone get their answer.
How about this instead? How about if you have a question, you speak up with your name?
There we go.
My name is Dean, and I have a degree in computer, and I worked a long time ago as a programmer. But now I'm trying to go back in because I've been doing some in a different field. I decided to go back into programming or IT. What's some of the good way to get my foot in the door? I mean, I've been taking classes a lot too, and it's a two-part question. What's some of the technology I need to know to get my foot in the door also?
Well, I guess it depends on where you are. I mean, what's keeping you from getting a job being a programmer right now?
I have, my skill is kind of like I have mostly like C or Java skill, but I don't have the latest like PHP. Oh, well, I have PHP. I don't have like the latest like Ruby and all that, where there's really high sophisticated. A lot of people are using those kind of higher level, more I guess 5G languages and all that.
So I guess what I think is that taking your Java or C skills and turning them into Ruby skills isn't that hard to do, and that you might just want to spend a little bit of time with a Ruby book or a Python book. But that what I would probably suggest doing if I were you is to look for some open source projects to work on. In other words, find a way to volunteer your time doing some programming.
How do I do that?
You go to net.
So I
What's
think
the name
so.
GitHub?
So you could go to like SourceForge
SourceForge.
and look at all the projects over there, and find one that looks. I mean, So going back to the last question that we had, what's a piece of technology that you wished worked better, right? I mean, what's a piece of access technology or a piece of software that you wished worked better, or what is it that you wished you could always do, and is there a technological solution for it? And then once you've sort of answered that question, maybe you can go on SourceForge and find a project that is not exactly what you want, but is maybe close to what you want. And then maybe you could, and if it's in a language that you want to learn, then you could, make a contribution to that project. All those SourceForge projects have a section that says, how can you help?
While I think it's good to find a project that you actually have some skin in the game in, like some kind of access technology or something, what I think is really important is finding a project where you feel like you have some comfort with it. Oh, this is something I've done in the past, or parts of this I've done in the past. And then sort of grab a hold of it and ignore all those self-doubts, like I don't know if I can do this or not, and start. And proving to yourself that you can actually do coding, and proving to others that you can do coding, i.e. adding to your resume open source work on the following projects, will probably help a lot. And the other thing that you should be doing if you want a job in this field is to start looking around and seeing who's hiring and what they're looking for, and start to interview. And that's the other thing, interviewing. I mean, you will get turned down. It will absolutely happen that you will get turned down in interviews. So start now. Show up, interview, don't do well, learn from the experience, and do it again.
All right.
And also I would say, you don't have to work on access technology, you don't have to work on, I used access technology, or I'd make it accessible or whatever as an example, but if there's just a piece of software that you feel really strong about and you want to extend its functionality, you can. I mean, what I found in learning new languages, and I, like you, have learned C and C++ and Perl and all those older languages, if you will. What I found is that when I learn new ones, they're pretty similar to those, and my foundations of how to do algorithm design and sort of how the program works and the functionality, that's not different. That's the same. It's just, how you type the words, pretty much. I mean, there are construction differences between them, but you can find people who can help you with the constructs. What you can't find often, or what is better, what you bring to the party is your ideas about how to do the design work and the algorithm work and stuff like that.